video just for you. The world can be a terrible place, but there are always things to cheer us up. Amazingly, they sometimes overlap. A number of the things we use every day only happen because of terrible tragedies and torture. Next time you gorge yourself on Twinkies or put on makeup in the mirror, remember that your joy cannot exist without someone's pain. So anyway, in this episode, we're going to be talking about the 10 popular innovations caused by human suffering. So first, number 10. The tragedies of the Great Depression in World War II gave us the bliss of the Twinkie. Yes, everyone knows, like their most famous product, Hostess should have expired a lot earlier than they did. During the Great Depression, when most companies were on the verge of collapsing, Hostess only stayed in business for a limited time. James Duar's original shortcake recipe had strawberry filling. The problem was that strawberries were only seasoned for like 2 months. While the economy around them crumbled, staying open for 60 days of the year no longer seemed like a suitable business model. To accommodate, they switched to a filling available year-round, bananas. These new banana cakes, or Twinkies, were a huge hit. However, their success was short-lived. Following America's entry into World War II, the government placed a ration on bananas. Again, Hostess had to try to find another filling. During the war, they used vanilla, which the switch was originally meant to give a temporary measure to outlast their ration. To Hostess' surprise, vanilla cakes were much more popular than the banana ones. Even after the ration ended, they never went back. Alright, next up is number 9. The power horde was invented because a soldier lost his lung in the Korean War. All of rock and roll was built around power hordes, right? It can be heard in songs by AC/DC, Nirvana, The Who, Led Zeppelin, for example, The Kinks, and even Neil Young, for example. Power hordes are essential to rock songs, that they're usually the first thing young guitarists learn. All this way can be traced to Link Wray and his 1958 song Rumble. Though it is now considered one of the greatest songs of all time, Wray originally didn't want to play it. Now, ever since he was a kid, Wray wanted to have a career as a singer. But before he could set off for show business, he had to serve in the Korean War. That decision cost him his dreams. The jungles of Korea were a breeding ground for diseases. Like a lot of his fellow soldiers, he suffered from a dreadful bout of tuberculosis. It was such a bad case that he had to have one of his lungs removed. No longer able to sing, he was forced to innovate as an instrumentalist. Now, his hopes may have been dashed, but inspired multiple generations by creating the bedrock of rock and roll, and being labeled as father of punk and metal is a good legacy too. Awesome legacies there. Number 8. Sun lamps were originally for dying World War I orphans. Following the dissemination of the German economy in World War I, the German public was undernourished. The limited food available mostly went to adults and returning veterans. As a result, children were mostly affected by the famine. In unprecedented numbers, sorry, I can't really speak today. Children developed rickets due to a lack of vitamin D, calcium, and phosphate. At the time, nobody knew what caused rickets. Dr. Kurt Holdschinski developed a thesis. He noticed that all the patients were pale, so he made a lamp that emitted ultraviolet light to see if the children got any better. It worked. The ultraviolet light cured the disease, and he started marketing the sun lamp. This design would serve as a prototype for the recreational tanning bed, thus giving a generation of celebrities and politicians that radioactive glow inspired countless urban legends. Unfortunately, UV light causes cancer, so don't get exposed by that too much, guys. Just want to let you know. Number 7. The first bicycle came after a horse apocalypse. In 1816, Mount Tambora erupted in Indonesia. It immediately killed about 4,600 people. So in the first 15 minutes, it was already a terrible disaster. The dust storm it unleashed killed another 10,000 people. By the end, the volcano caused enough famine and disease to kill about 90,000 people. For humans, it was a horrific event. For horses, it was an unprecedented disaster. The suit traveled to Europe that summer, blocking the sun for months. Without sunshine, oat crops across the continent died. Means no oatmeal, right? Unable to eat their staple crop, horses began to die by the thousands. Those horses that stuck around to eat the remaining crops were too much of a burden for the poor farmers, so the horses were shot in their heads. As horses were the main form of transportation, people had to look around for a new way to travel that didn't require food. Now, one such inventor, Karl Dra van Sonnenberg, created the dandy horse, named after the animal that had just been murdered or starved to death by the truckload. The dandy horse was the first personal propelled bicycle. Very nice. Number 6. The Civil War made Tabasco sauce, and Reconstruction made it popular. In the 1850s, Edmund McElhenny, was a successful banker. In the 1860s, he was bankrupt. The Civil War had ruined his business. With no more money, he moved back into the home of his parents-in-law on Avery Island in Louisiana. But his luck was about to turn around. Little did he know, the family's estate was built on a giant salt rock. He mined the salt and made a fortune selling it to the Confederacy. When the Union found out about this strategic reserve of salt, they attacked his salt mine and burned down his farm twice. Afraid for their lives, the family was forced to flee to Texas. McElhenny returned to Louisiana after the war. He planted a vegetable garden. To pile on the bad news, everything he planted died in the salty, burned ground. In New Orleans, he met a war veteran who told him about some pepper seeds he had from Mexico. McElhenny made the first bottle of Tabasco sauce from these seeds. Later, his sons would mass-produce the sauce. It became a hit because it added some necessary flavor to the bland food available during the Reconstruction. It is the same spice that we put on our bland food today. For example, if we're trying to make our scrambled eggs, taste more spicier, there you go, you got the thing. Number 5. Hip-hop owes a lot to Robert Kennedy's assassination. The tragic and untimely death of Robert Kennedy had tremendous consequences on 1960s politics. However, his real legacy may be the roundabout way that his death influenced hip-hop. In 1968, Michael Vinder joined Robert Kennedy's campaign as an aide. There, he met famed football player Rosie Greer, who was working security for Bobby Kennedy, Robert's son, I do believe. Greer was the one to rustle the gun out of Sirhan's hand. Now, Greer and Viner planned to work in Washington with Kennedy. When Kennedy died in California, Greer and Viner just stayed there. Both men went to work in the movie business. Greer starred in and Viner produced the soundtrack for a forgettable B-movie, The Thing with Two Heads. Now, the soundtrack had a minor hit with bongo rock. Building off that success, Viner formed the group Incredible Bongo Band and made them record a cover of Apache. Apache by the Incredible Bongo Band went on to be known as hip-hop's anthem. Popularized by DJ Kool Herc, Apache began the go-to song for his block parties. It was the first song Grand Wizard Theodore Scratched pioneered turntablism. By doing so, he turned it so the sound of the genre. Alright, hundreds of artists include Africa Bambaataa, Grandmaster Flash, Nas, Kanye West, LL Cool J, and even MC Hammer would go on to sample it. That's a lot of people for that thing, right? Number 4. The treadmill was a torture device for prisoners. Now, following the destruction of the Neapolitan Wars, England was in desperate need of a workforce. Prisoners supplied a large crop of new workers. In 1817, Sir William Cubitt came up with the first treadmill, which was more like the modern stair climber. Prisoners walked on spokes that turned a giant wheel. Their momentum crushed grain, churned water, or powered mills, hence the name treadmill. These devices were excruciatingly painful. excruciatingly painful. People would have to walk for 6 hours straight and climb a total of 14,000 feet. That's almost half of Mount Everest, every day for 5 days in a row. Worse, if you did not move the wheel, you would fall off and the wheel would keep spinning. Prisoners were injured daily. These treadmills were outlawed in England as cruel and unusual punishment in 1898. The treadmills at the gym may feel like torture because they were once work. So, number 3. Dunkin' booths were a violent byproduct of segregation. Dunkin' booths are the staple of fairgrounds and church carnivals everywhere. They combine feats of strength, lightly hurting someone, and amusement. It is fun that anyone could get behind. However, the original Dunkin' booths had a very specific audience. In the later 1800s, the craze of target games swept the country, including a game called the African Dodger. Behind the painted plantation scenes, black men stuck their heads up. The thrower would then try to hit the living human in the head with a baseball. If the thrower hit the target, he got a prize. After a while, the carnies realized that it was mean to throw projectiles at human heads. In a rare moment of empathy for the 1800s, the human heads were replaced with wooden stand-ins called Negro heads. The two games were brought together to make the African dip. In these new games, the thrower hit the target and triggered a release, causing the black person to fall in the water. Eventually, anyone could sit up there and just take a plunge, right? Number 2. The banjo was used to keep slaves from dying. The banjo is the preferred instrument of Appalachia, Muppet Frogs, and Steve Martin. However, it has a backstory even darker than Deliverance. In the 1600s, slave ships had a problem. Their slaves would become sickly and die. This was not a problem because their fellow humans were suffering. The slave owners were just losing profits. So to keep their slaves healthy, the owners let their slaves dance. Logically, the slaves weren't really in the mood to do this, but slave captains thought that traditional African instruments might convince them to dance. They chose stringed instruments. That is how the banjo was brought to the United States. It would have remained an obscure instrument in American culture, if not for the minstrel show. When minstrel shows were making fun of slaves, they included the image of a lazy slave playing the banjo. The instrument then became popular among the white theater goers. Number 1. Cosmetics came from mutilated prisoners. You may not know it by name, but somewhere in your house is Retin A. All of modern cosmetics use Retin A, which is the active ingredient in most acne medicines and wrinkle removers, which is seriously what I need. So, acne medicines. Anyway, it is so prevalent in our society that the World Health Organization calls it one of the most important medications needed in a basic health system, though it may seem benign, this quote-unquote youth in the jar, and other drugs only came about by forced experimentation on prisoners. Following World War II, human experimentation were outlawed everywhere after the passage of the Nuremberg Code, everywhere except Philadelphia apparently. From 1951 to 1974, dermatologist Albert Klingman went to Helmsburg prison to test new drugs on the prisoners. At first, he said that he saw the prisoners not as human beings, but as quote-unquote acres of skin. Funded by the CIA, Dow Chemical, and Johnson & Johnson, Klingman used the prisoners as biological guinea pigs. Some of his greatest hints include pulling the skin off of people with scotch tape, yanking out fingernails, directly pouring Agent Orange on open wounds, slipping LSD to patients, and forcing people to stay in rooms with radioactive isotopes. The most common treatment was giving prisoners experimental versions of the drugs to monitor the effects. One of the many drugs developed this way was the first iteration of Retin A. An unknown number of people died from these experiments. So anyway, if you have any other awesome inventions caused by human suffering, just let me know in the comments below. Alright, that is it guys. Hopefully you liked today's Lalone Top 10s production. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and see you guys next time. Take care everyone.